Sometimes, the person you stop to help on an ordinary day turns out to be the one person your heart never truly left behind. The rain had been falling steadily across a quiet stretch of highway outside Nashville, turning the late afternoon sky into a sheet of gray. Most drivers kept their eyes forward, focused on getting home before the weather grew worse. A few glanced toward the shoulder of the road, where an aging blue sedan sat motionless with its hazard lights blinking. But like so many people rushing through their own lives, they kept driving. Standing beside the car was a woman in her mid-30s wearing a light jacket that was no match for the cold rain. She held an umbrella over a young girl while trying to make a phone call that clearly wasn't going well. Olivia Bennett glanced at her screen and sighed. No signal. No roadside assistance. No one coming. The little girl beside her looked up with worried eyes. "Mom, are we going to be stuck here all night?" Olivia forced a smile. "Not a chance, sweetheart. We'll figure something out." Sophie nodded, trusting her mother the way children often do, even when they can sense things are harder than adults admit. A few moments later, the sound of an approaching engine cut through the rain. A black luxury SUV slowed unexpectedly before coming to a stop several yards ahead of them. Olivia watched cautiously as the driver's door opened. The man who stepped out looked like someone who belonged in a boardroom, not on the side of a highway in bad weather. Tall, confident, and dressed in a tailored charcoal coat, he carried himself with effortless composure. Yet instead of hurrying past, he walked directly toward them. "Looks like you could use a hand," he said with a polite smile. Olivia hesitated. Most strangers didn't stop anymore. "The car won't start," she admitted. "I think it's the battery, but I'm not sure. Mind if I take a look?" She studied him for a moment before nodding. "Thank you." The man introduced himself simply as Ethan. He rolled up his sleeves slightly and examined the vehicle while rain tapped softly against the hood. Olivia watched from under the umbrella, grateful but curious. There was something familiar about him, though she couldn't place it. Meanwhile, Ethan focused on the engine, but every few seconds his attention drifted. Something about Olivia seemed strangely recognizable. He couldn't explain it. Her voice, the way she smiled despite obvious stress. Even the way she comforted her daughter felt connected to a memory buried somewhere deep in his past. After several minutes, Ethan identified the issue. Loose connection. Nothing major. Within moments, the engine came back to life. Olivia let out a relieved laugh. "You have no idea how much this helps." Sophie grinned. "You're like a superhero." Ethan chuckled. "I don't know about that." But as he looked at the little girl, she smiled and said something so simple that it should have meant nothing at all. Yet the words hit him with unexpected force. "Mom always says kindness comes back when you least expect it." Ethan froze for a brief second. The sentence stirred something old and distant, like a forgotten song returning after years of silence. He couldn't remember why. Not yet. But as Olivia thanked him again and prepared to leave, he found himself watching her drive away through the rain, unable to shake the strange feeling that this chance encounter was only the beginning of a story he thought had ended long ago. The drive back to Nashville should have been routine, but Ethan Carter found himself unusually distracted. The rain had faded into a light drizzle, and the city skyline appeared ahead in the distance. Yet his thoughts remained fixed on a woman standing beside a broken-down sedan and a little girl with a bright smile. He could not explain why the encounter lingered in his mind. Over the years, he had met thousands of people. As the founder and chief executive officer of one of the fastest-growing technology companies in the country, conversations and introductions were a daily part of his life. Most faces disappeared from memory within hours. This one did not. Later that evening, Ethan sat alone in his penthouse apartment overlooking downtown Nashville. The floor-to-ceiling windows revealed countless city lights stretching across the horizon, but he barely noticed them. His attention drifted back to the words Sophie had spoken. "Kindness comes back when you least expect it." The sentence felt familiar, not because it was unusual, but because it seemed connected to a memory he could almost reach. He walked toward the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and tried to focus on work. His calendar for the next week was packed with investor meetings, interviews, and strategic planning sessions. Normally, those responsibilities consumed his attention completely. Tonight was different. Across town, Olivia Bennett finally pulled into the parking lot of a modest apartment complex. The old sedan rattled slightly before she turned off the engine. She sat quietly for a moment, grateful the vehicle had made it home. Sophie gathered her backpack and smiled. "Mom, that man was really nice." Olivia nodded. "Yes, he was. Do you think we will see him again?" The question caught her off guard. "Probably not," she answered gently. "Sometimes people help each other and then go back to their own lives." Sophie seemed satisfied with that answer and skipped toward the building entrance. Yet Olivia remained seated for another minute. Something about Ethan had felt strangely familiar. She had noticed it almost immediately. The calm voice, the thoughtful eyes, the sense that she had met him somewhere long ago. But that was impossible, she told herself. Nashville was a large city. Familiar faces appeared everywhere. The next morning, Ethan arrived at company headquarters before sunrise. Employees greeted him as he crossed the lobby, but he was barely paying attention. As the elevator climbed toward the executive floor, a memory flashed unexpectedly through his mind. A summer afternoon. A teenage girl laughing beneath bright sunlight. A voice telling him that kindness always found its way back. The image vanished before he could fully grasp it. Ethan stepped into his office and stood motionless for several seconds. The feeling was growing stronger. Whatever connection existed, it was not his imagination. Somewhere in his past was a missing piece he had forgotten. And for the first time in many years, he felt compelled to find it. Meanwhile, Olivia began. Another demanding day, unaware that the brief roadside encounter had left a far greater impression than either of them realized. Neither knew it yet, but a door that had remained closed for nearly 2 decades had just begun to open. For the next several days, Ethan tried to convince himself that he was simply distracted by stress, but the explanation no longer felt convincing. The memory that had surfaced in his office refused to disappear. Instead, it returned in fragments, each one slightly clearer than the last. During a meeting with investors, he briefly lost focus when he noticed a phrase in a presentation slide that reminded him of a conversation from long ago. Later, while walking through a downtown park after work, he passed a young couple sitting on a bench, laughing together beneath the afternoon sun. Without warning, another image flashed through his mind. A girl with long light brown hair sitting beside him on a wooden bench near a lake. He could hear her laughter. He could almost see her smile. Yet her face remained frustratingly out of reach. Meanwhile, Olivia's life continued at its usual pace. Every morning began before sunrise. She prepared breakfast, got Sophie ready for school, and rushed to her first job at a local medical office where she handled administrative work. In the evenings, she often picked up additional freelance bookkeeping assignments from home to help cover expenses. There was rarely enough time and never enough money, but she had learned to keep moving forward. Sophie was the reason she never allowed herself to quit. One Thursday afternoon, Olivia arrived at Sophie's elementary school for a parent event. The gymnasium buzzed with conversation as families gathered around student displays. Sophie proudly showed her mother a project she had completed about people who inspire her. Olivia smiled when she saw her own photograph attached to the poster board. Underneath it, Sophie had written in careful handwriting, "My mom never gives up, even when things are hard." Olivia felt her eyes grow moist and quickly blinked the emotion away. At nearly the same moment across town, Ethan was attending a charity board meeting. The discussion centered on educational programs for underprivileged children, a cause he strongly supported. As one board member described the importance of resilience, Ethan suddenly remembered another piece of the past. A teenage girl standing beside him after a high school football game. She had looked at him with complete confidence and said, "The people who keep going when life gets hard are the strongest people in the world." Ethan froze. This time the memory felt real. The voice matched the feeling he experienced whenever he thought about Olivia. After the meeting ended, he remained seated long after everyone else had left. Something significant was hidden behind these fragments. He could feel it. That evening, unable to ignore his curiosity any longer, Ethan opened his laptop and began searching through old photographs stored in digital archives from his hometown. Years of memories appeared on the screen. School events, community festivals, graduation pictures. Then he stopped. In the corner of a photograph taken nearly 20 years earlier stood a young woman whose face immediately sent a chill through him. The image was blurry, but the resemblance was unmistakable. Ethan leaned closer to the screen. His heart began to race. For the first time, he was no longer asking whether Olivia seemed familiar. He was beginning to wonder if she might actually be someone he had once known better than anyone else. The photograph remained on Ethan's screen long after midnight. He stared at the young woman standing near the edge of the frame, unable to look away. The image was grainy, and nearly 20 years had passed since it had been taken, but the resemblance was undeniable. The same eyes, the same smile, the same quiet warmth he had noticed on the side of the highway. Ethan leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. For the first time, the memories began connecting instead of appearing as scattered fragments. He remembered a small town outside Nashville. He remembered football games on Friday nights and long summer evenings by the lake. Most of all, he remembered a girl who always believed in people, even when they did not believe in themselves. Yet before he could fully understand what it meant, another question emerged. If Olivia really was the person he thought she might be, what had happened to her life during all those years? Across town, Olivia was finishing another long day. After putting Sophie to bed, she sat at the kitchen table reviewing bills. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. Rent was due soon. The car still needed additional repairs. A medical expense from several months earlier remained unpaid. None of it was unusual. She had spent years solving one problem at a time. Still, exhaustion settled heavily across her shoulders. She looked toward the hallway where Sophie's bedroom door stood slightly open and smiled softly. No matter how difficult things became, her daughter made every sacrifice worth it. The next morning began like countless others. Olivia dropped Sophie off at school before heading to work. During her lunch break, she stopped at a small grocery store to pick up a few essentials. Every purchase required calculation. Every dollar had a purpose. Meanwhile, Ethan spent the day attempting to focus on business matters. His company was preparing for a major expansion, and dozens of important decisions demanded his attention. Yet his thoughts repeatedly returned to Olivia. By late afternoon, curiosity had evolved into determination. He contacted an old friend from high school, someone who still lived near their hometown. During a brief phone call, Ethan casually mentioned several names from the past before carefully bringing up one more. There was a short silence on the other end of the line. "Olivia Bennett?" his friend asked. "I have not heard that name in years." Ethan's pulse quickened. "Do you remember what happened to her?" Another pause followed. "Not much. I know she moved away after graduation. Most people lost contact." "Why are you asking?" Ethan hesitated. "I think I may have met her." The conversation ended with more questions than answers, but one thing had become clear. Olivia was not simply someone who resembled a memory. She was connected to it. That evening, as Ethan stood beside the window of his office overlooking the city lights, he realized something surprising. For years he had measured success through numbers, acquisitions, and achievements. Yet none of those accomplishments had stirred his emotions the way this mystery now did. Somewhere beyond the skyline was a woman rebuilding her life one day at a time, completely unaware that she had awakened a chapter of the past Ethan thought had disappeared forever. And with each passing day, the need to understand that connection only grew stronger. Over the following week, Ethan found himself doing something he had not done in years. Instead of waiting for answers to appear, he actively searched for them. Yet despite his resources and connections, he approached the situation carefully. He did not want to invade Olivia's privacy. He only wanted to understand why the sight of her had awakened emotions he thought time had erased. One Saturday morning, after finishing a charity event downtown, Ethan stopped at a small neighborhood coffee shop. The visit had not been planned. He simply needed a quiet place away from meetings and expectations. As he stepped inside, the scent of fresh coffee and baked pastries filled the air. He ordered a drink and turned toward an empty table near the window. Then he stopped. Sitting at a corner table was Olivia. Across from her sat Sophie, working on what appeared to be a school project covered in colorful drawings and handwritten notes. Ethan hesitated. Part of him considered leaving. Another part knew opportunities like this rarely happened twice. Before he could decide, Sophie looked up and immediately recognized him. Her face brightened. "Mom, it is the car guy." Several customers smiled at the unexpected greeting. Olivia turned and looked surprised. "Ethan." He laughed softly. "I guess that is my official title now." Sophie waved enthusiastically. "You fixed our car." "I remember," Ethan replied. Olivia invited him to join them, and after a brief hesitation, he accepted. What began as a simple conversation quickly became something more comfortable. Sophie eagerly explained her school project while Ethan listened with genuine interest. Olivia watched the exchange with quiet curiosity. Most successful people she had met seemed distracted by their phones or schedules. Ethan gave the child his complete attention. It was a small thing, but she noticed. As the conversation continued, Ethan learned more about their lives. Sophie loved reading, science, and drawing. Olivia worked long hours, but never complained. Whenever Sophie mentioned a challenge, Olivia immediately redirected the discussion toward gratitude and optimism. The same quiet strength Ethan remembered from his fragmented memories seemed present in everything she did. Then something unexpected happened. Sophie opened a folder and accidentally dropped several papers onto the floor. Ethan bent down to help gather them. One sheet slid beneath his hand. It was a family assignment titled "The People Who Shaped My Life." Ethan glanced at it only briefly before handing it back, but one detail caught his attention. Under the section about her mother, Sophie had written a quote, "Kindness always finds its way back." Ethan froze for a fraction of a second. The exact phrase. Not similar. Exact. The words echoed through his mind like a voice from another lifetime. Olivia noticed his expression. "Are you okay?" she asked. Ethan looked at her carefully. For a moment, it felt as though years were collapsing into seconds. "Yes," he answered quietly. "I just remembered something." Olivia held his gaze slightly longer than before. There was uncertainty in her eyes now, as though she too sensed a connection she could not explain. Neither of them spoke about it. Yet when the conversation ended and Ethan walked back toward the door, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. The mystery was no longer whether Olivia was connected to his past. The real question was how deeply their lives had once been intertwined. After leaving the coffee shop, Ethan sat in his SUV for several minutes without starting the engine. The phrase from Sophie's assignment kept repeating in his mind. Kindness always finds its way back. He knew those words. Not from a book, not from a speech, from a person. The realization settled over him slowly but unmistakably. Olivia was no longer a possibility from his past. She was becoming a certainty. Yet the closer he came to the truth, the more complicated his emotions became. Over the following days, he found reasons to stay connected. Nothing forced or intrusive. When a community literacy program announced a weekend reading event for children, Ethan attended as one of the sponsors. To his surprise, Olivia and Sophie were there. Sophie immediately ran over to greet him with the enthusiasm only children possess. Olivia smiled politely, though there was now a thoughtful look in her eyes whenever she spoke to him. She seemed to be studying him the same way he was studying her. During the event, Ethan watched Olivia interact with other parents and children. She volunteered to help organize activities even though she was clearly tired from a demanding week. Whenever someone needed assistance, she stepped forward without hesitation. The more he observed her, the more pieces of the past seemed to align. Yet another question continued to trouble him. If she remembered him too, why had she never said anything? Later that afternoon, as families began leaving, Sophie showed Ethan a drawing she had made. It featured a small house, a bright sun, and 3 stick figures standing together. Ethan smiled. "That is beautiful." "Who are they?" Sophie pointed proudly. "That is me and my mom." Then she hesitated. "The third person is just someone who helps people." Ethan laughed softly. "Sounds like a pretty important person." Before Sophie could answer, Olivia gently called her over. As they prepared to leave, Ethan offered to walk them to their car. The old sedan was still running, but its age was becoming obvious. When Olivia opened the driver's door, a strange sound came from the engine compartment. Her smile faded slightly. "Please do not tell me something else is wrong." Ethan glanced toward the vehicle. "Have you had it inspected recently?" Olivia shook her head. "Not yet. I have been putting it off." Ethan hesitated before speaking. "I know a repair shop that does excellent work. Let me arrange an inspection." The expression on Olivia's face changed immediately. The warmth disappeared, replaced by guarded caution. "That is kind of you, but I can handle it. I am only offering to help." "I know." Her voice remained polite but firm. "I just prefer taking care of my own responsibilities." Ethan nodded, though the response surprised him. Most people accepted assistance without question. Olivia was different. She carried herself with quiet pride, determined to stand on her own no matter how difficult life became. As she drove away, Ethan realized something important. Whatever history existed between them, It was not going to be uncovered through money or favors. If he wanted answers, he would have to earn her trust. And somewhere deep inside, a feeling he had not experienced in many years told him that Olivia already knew far more than she was willing to say. The distance between certainty and truth turned out to be much larger than Ethan expected. He now believed he knew who Olivia was, but belief was not enough. He needed proof. More importantly, he needed to understand why every interaction with her carried an invisible weight neither of them acknowledged. A few days later, an unexpected opportunity arrived. Ethan attended a fundraising luncheon hosted by a local nonprofit organization. As he entered the event hall, he was surprised to see Olivia near the registration table. She was volunteering, helping guests find their seats, and answering questions with her usual calm professionalism. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Olivia offered a polite smile. Small world. Ethan returned the smile. It keeps getting smaller. Throughout the afternoon, they crossed paths several times. Each conversation remained friendly, yet something unspoken lingered beneath the surface. Ethan noticed that whenever the discussion drifted toward personal history, Olivia gently redirected it elsewhere. She never appeared uncomfortable. She simply seemed determined to keep certain doors closed. Near the end of the event, a sudden rainstorm moved through the city. Guests hurried toward exits while volunteers worked to protect equipment and decorations. Olivia gathered several boxes of materials and carried them toward a storage room. Ethan stepped forward to help. This time she accepted. Together, they moved supplies through a quiet hallway away from the crowd. The silence between them felt strangely familiar. Finally, Ethan decided he could not avoid the question any longer. Have we met before? Olivia stopped walking. The question hung in the air for several seconds. When she turned toward him, her expression revealed neither surprise nor confusion. Instead, there was something closer to resignation. Why would you ask that? Ethan studied her face carefully. Because every time I talk to you, I feel like I am remembering something. Olivia looked away briefly. Memories can be complicated. That is not an answer. A faint smile appeared, but it carried sadness rather than humor. Maybe some questions are harder than others. Before Ethan could respond, another volunteer called Olivia's name from down the hallway. The moment ended as quickly as it had begun. Yet her reaction told him more than any direct answer could have. She knew something. Later that evening, Ethan returned home unable to shake the conversation. He opened the old digital photo archives once again. This time he searched more carefully, moving through yearbooks, local newspaper images, and graduation photographs. Then he found it. A larger, clearer picture from senior year. There was no uncertainty now. Standing beside a younger version of himself was Olivia Bennett. The same eyes, the same smile, the same person. Ethan stared at the image as realization finally settled into place. The girl he had once known better than anyone had been standing in front of him all along. Yet the discovery brought another mystery. If Olivia recognized him too, why had she hidden it? Why had she never spoken his name? As those questions filled his mind, Olivia sat alone in her apartment across town. In her hands was an old photograph she had not looked at in years. She traced a finger across the faded image before quietly placing it back into a drawer. Her eyes lingered on it for a long moment. Then she whispered words no one else could hear. You finally remembered. The next morning, Ethan could no longer pretend uncertainty remained. The photograph had answered the question that had haunted him for weeks. Olivia Bennett was not simply someone from his past. She was the girl who had once shared his dreams, his hopes, and nearly every important memory of his youth. Yet instead of bringing peace, the discovery left him with a deeper sense of confusion. If Olivia had recognized him from the beginning, why had she acted as though they were strangers? More importantly, what had happened between them all those years ago that still seemed powerful enough to silence the truth? For several days, Ethan wrestled with those questions. He considered calling her directly, but something stopped him. He sensed that whatever had separated them had never fully healed. Forcing a conversation would only make things worse. Then, unexpectedly, the opportunity arrived on its own. One afternoon, Olivia received a call from Sophie's school. A regional academic competition had selected several students for a special recognition ceremony, and Sophie was among them. The event would be held at a downtown conference center. Olivia immediately arranged time away from work so she could attend. What she did not know was that Ethan's company had sponsored the program and that he would also be present. The ceremony filled the auditorium with proud families and excited children. Sophie beamed as her name was announced. Olivia applauded enthusiastically from her seat, her eyes filled with pride. Across the room, Ethan noticed the moment and found himself smiling. Some things about Olivia had clearly never changed. She still celebrated other people's successes more than her own. After the ceremony ended, families gathered in a reception area. Sophie rushed between tables, showing her certificate to anyone willing to admire it. Eventually, she spotted Ethan. "Look what I got," she said proudly. Ethan examined the certificate. "That is impressive. You should be proud of yourself." Sophie grinned. "Mom says hard work matters more than talent." Ethan looked toward Olivia. The familiar phrase triggered another memory. Suddenly, he remembered a late-night study session before final exams. Olivia had said almost the exact same words. The realization hit him with unexpected force. Before he could stop himself, he turned to her. "You always used to say that." Olivia froze. For several seconds, neither moved. The noise of the crowded room seemed to fade away. Her expression shifted from surprise to something far more complicated. "So you remember now?" she said quietly. Ethan nodded. "I do." Sophie glanced between them, confused by the sudden tension. Sensing the conversation had become personal, Olivia gently encouraged her daughter to visit another display across the room. Once Sophie left, silence settled between them. Finally, Ethan spoke. "Why did you not tell me?" Olivia looked away briefly before meeting his eyes again. "Because I already knew how the story ended." The words landed heavily. Ethan felt a knot form in his chest. "I never forgot you." A faint sadness crossed her face. "Maybe not. But for a long time, I believed you did." The statement carried years of hurt beneath its calm surface. For the first time, Ethan realized that whatever had separated them was not simply distance or time. It was a wound that had never truly closed. And standing there in the crowded reception hall, he understood that discovering Olivia again was only the beginning. The harder truth was still waiting to be uncovered. The conversation at the reception hall stayed with Ethan long after the event ended. Olivia's words echoed in his mind during the drive home. "For a long time, I believed you did." The sadness in her voice had been real. It was the kind of pain that could only come from years of unanswered questions. A few days later, Ethan asked if they could meet somewhere quiet and talk. After some hesitation, Olivia agreed. They chose a small park near the lake on the edge of the city. It reminded Ethan of places they used to visit when they were young, though neither mentioned that at first. The afternoon was calm, and a gentle breeze moved across the water. For several moments, they simply sat on a bench, unsure where to begin. Finally, Olivia broke the silence. "After graduation, I waited for you." Ethan turned toward her. "What do you mean? You promised you would call when you got to Boston." Ethan frowned. "I did call." Olivia slowly shook her head. "No, you never did." Confusion filled his face. "Olivia, I called for weeks. I wrote letters too." Her expression changed instantly. "Letters?" Ethan nodded. "I never stopped writing until I finally believed you did not want to hear from me." They stared at one another in disbelief. Piece by piece, the truth began to emerge. Years earlier, circumstances beyond either of their control had disrupted their communication during a difficult transition. Messages had never reached their destination. Assumptions replaced facts. Hurt feelings replaced trust. Neither had betrayed the other. Neither had chosen to walk away. They had both spent years believing a story that was never true. Olivia looked down at her hands. "I spent so much time thinking you left because your life was moving forward and I no longer fit into it." Ethan's voice softened. "And I spent years thinking you had decided I was not part of your future." The realization left them both quiet. So much time had been lost to a misunderstanding neither had created. Yet neither focused on regret. They could not change the past. They could only decide what to do with the present. Over the following months, their friendship slowly deepened. There were no grand promises and no rushed decisions. Instead, there were ordinary moments that mattered more. Ethan attended Sophie's school activities. Olivia learned that behind Ethan's success remained the same thoughtful young man she once knew. Sophie quickly became the bridge connecting their worlds. She trusted Ethan because he consistently showed up, listened, and cared. One evening, nearly a year after their unexpected reunion, the three of them returned to the same lakeside park. The sun was setting, painting the water with shades of gold and orange. Sophie ran ahead toward a nearby walking path while Olivia and Ethan lingered behind. Ethan smiled as he watched the child. She is incredible. Olivia nodded proudly. She really is. Then she looked at him. Thank you for being part of our lives. Ethan met her eyes. Thank you for giving me a second chance to be. For a moment, neither spoke. They did not need to. The years of confusion were finally behind them. The future remained unwritten, but for the first time, they were walking toward it together. As Sophie called for them to catch up, Ethan and Olivia followed her down the path. The journey ahead would have challenges, just like any other. But this time there would be no unanswered questions, no missing messages, and no forgotten truths. There would only be honesty, trust, and the quiet understanding that sometimes life gives people one more opportunity to find what they thought they had lost forever.